everybody, and welcome to the Healthtech Pigeon podcast, bringing you the top health tech news stories and analysis every week. I'm Belle, and I'm back with me today. I've got SomX's very own Daisy joining me to discuss some of the best health tech news. And as ever, we've got Adama stepping into the producer role. She'll sit here silently and judge. I kid, she doesn't judge. She pulls out excellent insights for you all to hear and keeps us on track. Daisy, how are you? How has your week been so far?
Hi, Belle. Yeah, no, it's not been too bad so far. I think there's been actually a lot of news. I feel we've been pinging things back and forth about everything that's going on in health tech, biotech. There's been a lot of really interesting stories. I'm quite interested to get cracking on the ones that we've got going on.
Nice.
Today,
Apart from the things we're talking about today, what has tickled your fancy this week?
Well, I feel like I say what's tickled my fancy. I certainly know what's tickled your fancy, Belle. Everything to do with Nobel Prize.
It's Nobel Prize week, and I don't like it just because my name is in the title, but it's so much fun. Genuinely, every year I'm just like, what will it be this year? Expecting to be somewhat like unimpressed by whatever it is, and each year I'm like, I love science. It's so fun. But this year felt like quite a tide change, I think, in terms of the prizes. I'm seeing lots of people online saying it's all about AI, but it feels sort of bigger than that. And I do think, particularly in health tech and in biotech, it seems sort of really relevant across all three science categories this year. We've had neural networks winning the physics prize. We've had RNA research winning the medicine and biology prize. And then in chemistry, we've had kind of computational protein design, which also feels very medically and healthy. I mean, as a chemist, that one feels like it can go in any direction. So it's always exciting when it feels like it's got kind of a health slant to it as well. Brings all my worlds together. So yeah, I joked this week that Nobel Prize week is my fashion week. But here we are. It's been exciting.
Would we be a bunch of scientists if we didn't think otherwise?
It's very true. It's very true. I always joke that I could never win a Nobel Prize because it sounds like someone's going, no, Belle. And it's just impossible. Anyway, let's get cracking on this week's health tech stories. We've got so many stories to choose from today, but Daisy, I thought we'd start with a story that you picked out of this week's lineup. So Medical Express reports that wearable sensors are moving into critical care roles. Research published in the International Journal of Systems, Control and Communications has looked at how wearables might change the management of patients in intensive care units, particularly in the continuous monitoring of vital signs, and movements of critically ill patients, offering a more personalised and less invasive approach to treatment. So the key thing here is that ICU patients need to have regular monitoring. And at the moment, that falls largely to healthcare professionals who have to come in at regular intervals and take blood pressure, take blood tests, take urine tests, monitor their vital signs, which is not only a huge amount of work for that person, but it means that we don't necessarily have a complete view of a person's signs across the day. There are going to be gaps between them. But it also means that the person in intensive care is going to be surrounded with all these like just huge pieces of equipment. There's going to be blood pressure monitors. There's going to be things inserted. It's not necessarily a nice situation for both healthcare practitioner or the patient themselves. So this technology could provide continuous monitoring. It would presumably sit like, I don't know, like a smartwatch or something like that, or a clue like on the arm. They've not actually decided yet. I think the work is going into designing a single device that allows them to monitor all the signs they want to. But it could provide a really interesting solution to this issue, where we have healthcare professionals which are overburdened with work, with administrative tasks. And also we've got this legacy technology sort of taking up space in ICU and in hospitals. So this could not only give better insights, reduce infection risks, and save time, it could also expand our understanding of health and disease in critically ill patients. So Daisy, you've read the story. I would love to hear your thoughts here.
Yeah, so a lot of my thoughts, like you just said there, I think it'll be a really great addition to almost like the space around you as you are sat as a patient. And I think the well-being as a patient whilst you're, in these critical care situations, when you're like surrounded by, how many machines beeping, pinging. Thankfully, I've not been in those critical care conditions, but I have been around people who have, and I think it'll add a element of better well-being whilst being in that space, as well as when you have family around and all these machinery taking up a lot of space in the room. Hopefully that will be reduced and it just be a bit of a nicer environment to be in, if you are the patient or as family. And also that would, hopefully free up some space, maybe get some more hospital beds out of it as well. Maybe if we can fit things into like smaller spaces. Obviously we don't want people just to be crammed into boxes, but I definitely think when space is such an important asset, doing things what we can to reduce that, the things that take up space would, is nothing but a positive really. And I guess my only concern about this is just how, we all wear, okay, we don't all wear, but we're all aware, I've definitely got one, Fitbits or Google Watches or Apple Watches, and they give you like a continuous monitoring. But I do feel like there is lots of talk on fitness forums about which one is the most reliable, which one does like most accurately tell you what your your heart rate, and stuff like that. So I think my only concern would be, would we be losing accuracy over space? And obviously that's not a great situation to be in. We want to make sure that, all these readings are accurate. So I'd be really interested to see how this tech performs versus, say, our bog standard Fitbit watch versus, all the current machinery at the minute. I think that's something that'd be really interesting to see how that tech compares. But otherwise, like, I love it. Like, I think this is a great start. And I do feel like, I don't want to jinx anything here, but I do feel like places like Apple, like, are they not? I feel like that's probably already on their radar and they're probably already making massive strides, because they're always quite under the radar until like they're ready to release. So it'll be interesting to see who else is already doing this, maybe a bit more secretively. But yeah, I'm really interested to see how this goes and where the future of care goes with it.
Nice. You brought up a few interesting things there. I think one for me is family and visitors when you're in ICU, because obviously if you're in ICU, you're very, very ill, and often you're not awake necessarily to appreciate your surroundings, but you likely will have people coming to visit you. And if you are dealing with what's already an incredibly hard situation of a loved one who's going through something potentially traumatic, then actually having people come in every hour to do invasive tests and stuff is probably another thing that is quite difficult to deal with in those scenarios. And having something much more discreet where you know that all the data is going back to someone who's able to make those decisions, but they're able to offer you that little bit more space to deal with whatever you're dealing with and to offer the love and care and support that you and your loved ones require, is really nice as well. And I think the space thing is an interesting issue as well, because there's an interesting equilibrium here, isn't there? Like, yes, we need space and we'd love to get more beds in, but there's no point putting beds in if healthcare professionals don't have the time or energy to devote to that extra healthcare. And so something like this is a win-win, because it physically reduces the amount of space needed so you can get more beds in and stuff, but it's also freeing up that time for healthcare professionals so that they can then spend time with additional patients to the ward or whatever that might look like. So it seems really interesting and, like you say, a winner. It is fun, isn't it? How quickly things have changed. And like you say, things are developed in secret and then they sort of come to the fore and all of a sudden Apple's got a heart monitor on the back of it. You're like, oh, how did that happen? Like, I've got a friend who needs to have his blood pressure monitored fairly regularly. And the advice now is to get like it's not a watch, but it is like a bangle sort of thing. And that's not what you think of when you think of blood pressure monitors. You think of that big inflatable armband that you put in and it's uncomfortable and you've got to go do it in a quiet room or something, so you don't want to just whip it out at wherever you are. So it is interesting as well that we're already seeing those sorts of things advised from a medical standpoint, because it offers that continuous monitoring and it allows patients to see when they're dipping, when they're not. So yeah, now we just need to work out how to turn it all into one thing. So that will be the trick. I will leave that to the developers and the scientists.
I guess like it also comes in with like you were saying about blood pressure, is also like the diabetes monitoring and all that kind of stuff. So it does really feel like a big, like actually we've got some amazing technology here. We're doing lots of things. Let's actually try and put it all into as few devices as possible.
Yeah, I'll be really, really interested to see how this continues. But yeah, love the concept, and just feels like we really are entering this new era of medical care, which is pretty amazing. All right, our second story today comes from Axios and is titled How AI Twins Could Help Fill the Women's Health Gap. So Twin Health is a company creating digital twins of patients' metabolism. They use over 3,000 daily data points collected through a selection of sensors, which include continuous glucose monitoring, heart rate monitoring, blood pressure sensors, all the stuff we've just discussed, basically. They collect that data and they pass it back to healthcare providers in order to send patients personalized recommendations for nutrition, activity, sleep, basically things supporting behavior change, with the idea to potentially prevent and even reverse metabolic disorders. They're hoping the technology will help patients understand their health in more detail, but also help them avoid chronic metabolic conditions like obesity, prediabetes, and type 2 diabetes. Interestingly, as summarized by the title, this tech is being offered to men and women. There's no reason why it should be gendered, but they do think it could be of particular value to women, who they cite as often taking on the role of caregivers at the neglect of their own health, as well as helping women understand sort of the intersection between metabolic health disorders and reproductive health, gynecological health, and how all those things interconnect. So lots of really interesting things, which I'm sure you'll dive into, Daisy. I think one of the other things which I'd love to just pose as a question or to get your thoughts on is how they are terming this an AI twin. Like ultimately, this is a behavioral change app which uses real world health data to feed into it. Does that make it an AI twin? I'm not so sure. Is that the most appropriate label for what this technology is? Who knows? But Daisy, I'm going to fling those questions over to you and see what your thoughts on this story are.
Yeah, that's definitely, I feel like, is the AI really, like what is the AI element to this story? But either way, I do think it is like quite an interesting way to like pair your health and all the things that maybe kind of generate a basis for you to then understand what may or may not happen in the future in regards to your health, or maybe like acting as a bit of like a prophylaxis to be like, we've noticed these metabolic changes in you, and for your twin this has then led to this, so actually maybe let's talk, maybe you should think about doing XYZ instead. So that sounds like a very interesting tool. I would really love to see in more detail. Maybe I could do some because it's the first time I've heard of this company, but I'd really love to find out more about what exactly it is and how their AI algorithms, or how that's all working together to pull it all together. But I do really think it's something that you can use to like empower your own health and your own like self-care. And I do think, sometimes it can be really hard to understand why you're feeling the way you're feeling, or, there's definitely certain parts of our body and our health where you don't always realize, oh, that was a symptom of that, I just didn't know it then. So hopefully that will bring all of these things together in a way that you can then understand and reflect, to maybe get, realize this is what's happening to you sooner, or, realize that the symptoms before it really comes into anything more serious.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. So the company Twin Health, they say that every member's information is looked over by a clinician or a doctor. So those clinicians do have access to those health insights in order to inform their recommendations and inform treatment. I think where it seems really, really interesting is exactly what you said, is when symptoms don't necessarily connect to what you think the problem is. And if you went to a GP saying, I've got a sore leg, that that is the symptom of something wrong with your leg, most likely. But so many complex diseases have symptoms that, especially immunodiseases, especially women's health diseases, have symptoms that aren't related to what you think of when you think of that disease at all. So you just neglect to mention, oh, by the way, I've also felt tired, because you don't think it's the symptom that the doctor needs to hear to make the diagnosis that you want. So actually having this very comprehensive and holistic at times view of your health data not only is interesting to you to see that, but for your clinician, really, really valuable, because they don't have to dig around and think, oh, but are you feeling tired too at the moment? How have you been? Have you been struggling with your sleep? Have you been struggling to get your daily movements in? All these things which might point towards certain things, but sometimes require a bit of digging because patients don't know to mention it. I think it can only be a good thing. And much like the previous story, it talks about the view on kind of ICU patients. What's interesting here is that these are people that aren't necessarily ill. They're wanting to take charge and take ownership of their health to live a long and happy life. So that's the nice thing here, is it's not reliant on someone being ill and wanting to track it. It's like, how do I keep myself healthy and how do I optimize my health? I have to say, I sort of hate the word optimize in healthcare settings, but hopefully you appreciate the intent there. But how do I make myself as healthy as I can be within my control? And then when things happen that need external support, care, treatment, how do I get that in the best way? So I think it's a really cool thing. What do you think then about the AI element? Like, I'm struggling to work out what it is at all in this story, if I'm honest. Obviously, it's collecting all these data points in order to kind of build this twin of a person's health. And they've said they use AI as a way to get there, but they don't mention how they use AI in this story. They don't mention what data. We know that something's feeding into something and it's going across to a doctor, but I'm always a little bit hesitant when I see the word AI and I don't see any mention of data sets or anything like that, because AI is such an incredibly powerful tool. And I think we're very lucky to be living in this new age where vast amounts of data can be analysed using computational techniques, which include AI. But when you don't mention what it is, it feels a bit like an AI washing. And I just want to dig in and learn exactly what you mean by that.
Yeah, and that's just something I was going to bring, is like, I know we've been having a lot of conversations in SomX about, is it AI or is it just a really good algorithm? And like, what's the difference there? And how do we talk about the difference? And also, really what is the difference? And, AI washing, that is a great phrase. And I think especially the last couple of years, I feel like more and more each day things are just getting AI washed continuously. So yeah, I mean, all I could think about is that the fact that they're maybe using all the data and predicting how you might then also react. But again, is that just a snazzy algorithm, or what is the the artificial intelligence behind it? What is it that their algorithms are producing that makes it more than just an algorithm? But it is definitely a very interesting conversation just in health tech and biotech in general.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks, Daisy. So I thought we'd finish today on a nice blood-boiling story just to get us all jazzed up before we continue on with our workday. So from The Guardian, women's health tech is less likely to get funding if women are on the founding team. Research has shown that health technology aimed at women has a lower chance of getting funding, even if it has just one woman on the founding team, and even if that woman is paired with a male counterpart or counterparts. This is absolutely enraging. It's found also that female founders are less likely to secure funding if they use any advocacy words in their funding application. So that's things like women's rights, which I'm not really sure is advocacy, and just what we should all expect as a bare minimum. Take control or freedom. And on the flip side, and the thing that really grinds my gears, that if male femtech founders, so male founders of women's healthcare companies, use these same words, they benefit from increased investment. Make it make sense.
Deep breaths, deep breaths.
I know. So this is truly like damned if you do, damned if you don't here. I think it's quite obvious that having a woman on the founding team of a women's health company would be advantageous. They know the problems, they've lived with them. But it seems investors don't agree, citing reasons such as women needing more mentoring. They cite flow here. I know we've had lots of conversations about flow recently, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it now, but they are a very interesting, high-profile example of a women's health company that's done incredibly well. They've become the first women's health unicorn, and they have 2 men on their founding team. Now, they're a company that have lots of brilliant women on the wider team. We know and work with lots of them. They are a fantastic team doing brilliant things for women's health. But there is no denying the fact there are 2 men on the founding team, and that has captured the media's attention, as it probably should. I think we talk about inequity in funding a lot on this podcast. The thing is, when women can't even get funding in women's health, it just begs belief. Like, what is going on here? At this point, I'm struggling to offer a balanced view. Like, it's just sexism, pure and simple. And it feels like male investors, and they are primarily male investors, wanting to protect the status quo. So before I go into even more rage bait, I'd like to open the floor to you, Daisy, because this is a long read. There's lots of people contributing towards it, lots of thoughts, and I'm sure it's stoked lots of them in you as well. So what do you think about this story?
So I know, like, we could talk about this till the cows come home. This is such one of those conversations that, you know, once you get started on it, it's really hard to stop getting really annoyed and angry about it. But yeah, just everything. And I feel like it is definitely one of those situations where, you know, like, what's bad if a woman does it, but good if a man does it. And it is genuinely infuriating. And I guess we've got to think about why that is, and is it because we have more men in charge of, you know, venture capital decisions? Probably, I assume. And a part of this article which really did make me laugh was at some point it mentions how initially it wasn't thought that there would be any kind of preference towards men or women when it came to making decisions on funding. And I would love to find out which researchers decided that there would not be any difference, because when all of our lives, no matter like who you are, especially if you're unfortunately not a white man, there's always going to be some kind of disadvantage just because of the way that society is constructed. And that's something that I do see changes in every single day. And it's great that we are coming forward, even when at times it feels like information like this feels like it's taken us back. But you know, is it because there's more men in those funding positions? Is it our internal biases? Because you know, I can also, you know, women and people can have their own internal biases, even against their own like gender or race or anything like that. So that's something as well to consider. But at the end of the day, I do think that if we were to have more women in these spaces, that would greatly help this issue. And it is definitely something that I would love to see change over the few years. And I think we are getting there. And I think like it is like a, you know, creepy crawly, it's happening, but I would love to see it happen faster.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it raises, like you say, these internal biases are definitely the root of all of this. And what's sad is that this research comes from a large body of research. They've not just looked at a few startups and decided this. The main researcher quoted in this article analysed over 1,700 funding agreements
from
made by over 500 venture companies in the UK, US and Canada, and found that in a, quote, shocking number of cases, companies run by women receive less funding than similar companies run by men. And they cite lots of reasons here as to why that could be. And lots of them are what people assume women will be led or motivated by. They say here that investors admitted they see founders more as a feminist who prioritized social impact at the expense of financial returns from the man. I mean, if that's not a case of an investor just putting their thoughts onto the prospective founder, I don't know what is. But yeah, I think there's change, and I think it's good that we're having these conversations because it shows that there is a real interest in changing the status quo here and ensuring that there is at least something dawning on equality across funding. And ultimately, as these baby steps start to happen, this is when we will get more successful women-founded startups, and we will start to see women taking up positions at the boards of other companies, on investor boards. And when they do start to occupy those senior positions, maybe things will change. One of the things that strikes me as something that we also need to do, and it's not mentioned necessarily in this article, although they do talk about the power of words and how investors are put off by words such as empower and feminism and gender gap, even though they have very real issues in medical care. The women's health outcomes versus men's is a very real thing, and that shouldn't be seen as quote unquote feminist to say that. It is feminist. That's because we'll use the real term, not the phrase that people like to think that people mean by it. But I think there's also some neutralizing of language that needs to happen, because we see lots of men's health startups that deal with men's disorders, erectile dysfunction, hair loss, various other things, and they're not met with any sort of embarrassment or anything. I think you probably could say the word penis in a board in a board meeting and no one would worry. But if you were to start talking about women's organs, then investors shrink back, and there is a neutralization there. Like, it shouldn't be seen as you saying something odd or out of favor when you just are naming body parts. Like, what is going on? So I do think there also needs to be a neutralizing there, and men and male investors need to be aware of those reactions that they do have internally when those words come at them, and think, is this a me problem or am I projecting? So yeah, I think there's lots of work to be done. I think articles like this in publications such as The Guardian, this is, it's gone beyond small people in health tech or healthcare scenarios talking about this. It is definitely part of the wider discourse, and I think that is brilliant. And I really hope we do get there.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just going to say as well, like, a part of this, I think, definitely lies in the wider education of, how we see men and women and how we have those conversations and how we address our societal issues around, men and women, men versus women, and how we look at all of that. And a lot of it is down to like educating our young boys and making sure that these kind of things are in from an early age, and try to kind of nourish a much more wholesome and much more inclusive environment to the young men who are, growing up today. And also what I would love to do, just for a great, little list of actually what are the statistics on the funding that have been mentioned in the article. So on average, female-founded tech companies in the UK, US and Canada have raised 23% less capital per deal compared to male-founded companies. One of the other ones is fem tech companies founded exclusively by women receive only 28% of venture capital funding. And then femtech companies founded entirely by men receive 38% of venture capital funding. And then as well, one last one, approximately 1/3 of femtech funding goes to companies founded by mixed gender teams. So I just wanted to put those statistics out there just because it is quite interesting just to see just how actually very different those numbers are. But it is definitely that. Yeah. I would love to see those numbers change. I would love to see a year on year. I would love to see someone do a roundup every year or every couple of years just to see how those numbers have changed and what's happened. Because I think the more we talk about it and the more it becomes like a global conversation every year, then that actually might start to change.
Yeah, I agree. Well, the nice thing is, and even if just today's pigeon is something to look at, there were lots of brilliant stories about innovations in women's health that we don't have time to talk about today, but you can read about more in the newsletter. So there are some brilliant startups that have received great funding rounds. There are some startups just doing brilliant things. So the news is not all bad. There are genuinely brilliant things happening in women's health, and the founding teams are getting the funding that they need to push forward those innovations. So it's not all bad. I encourage you to look at them and enjoy the good with it. Like, it's just how it happens, isn't it? Like, these things are always going to start feeling unbalanced, and eventually we get to a point where everything starts to feel good, I hope. I'd like to just finish this last story with kind of a call to action for everyone. It's clear that a lot needs to change when it comes to women in venture capital. And we've linked this in today's Pigeon, but our friends at Kavanagh Health are trying to build a community to unite those with the power to make change and launch a meaningful sponsorship and allyship program that offers practical and impactful support. They are currently doing a survey about women in VC. So if that sounds like you and it's something you'd like to be a part of, we really encourage you go and fill that survey. The more people that contribute, the better. And the more support they can provide that's actually targeted to the needs of people within this environment. So people working in VC, women in the health tech space, please do get involved, because I think it's a really, really brilliant initiative. In fact, Adama, who can't speak because she is in like producer mode, has been involved, I think, in that. So it's been a really, really fun thing to be part of, and hopefully the beginning of a brilliant, brilliant initiative. So that's all for today, folks. Thanks, Daisy, for all your support. Thank Adama, as ever, in the background. Check out our stories in Healthtech Pigeon and Biotech Dodo if that tickles your fancy. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.